You meant to come over to the UK about now, wasn't it?
Yeah, so initially we were going to come over in January because we were doing some work in Ireland, and there just wasn't enough time to set it up. So we're like, well, let's set it up for March or April.
Yeah.
And here we are. Yeah, there was actually a lot of things that we had planned that haven't happened up until now. So
But
just like
at
everybody
least our
else.
meeting is happening, just even if it's not happening face to face.
That is correct. That's
You
right.
know, I'm not going to judge, but I mean, it's wine time here. I'm not sure if it's beer or wine time at 10 o'clock in Seattle, but
No,
we'll cross
no.
over.
In fact, coffee should be arriving shortly.
Good, good. Well, while we're on the subject of coffee, this is, I mean, there's a number of topics here, right? One's got to be lean coffee, another
Hmm.
has to be a personal Kanban, and then maybe there's other stuff that is in the pipeline that we can
Yep.
cover off as well. But so
Yep. So you guys
I
have
run
done
London Lean.
500 of them, I understand.
What's that? Sorry,
You guys have done 500 lean coffees, I understand.
is that? No, I'm going to say yes because I haven't looked at the numbers, but yeah. So I mean, I set the first London Lean Coffee up with a couple of people with Vasi, and then took it over. And I think basically what I've done is every time I've gone somewhere, so I started in West London.
Hmm.
Well, the initial one was in Liverpool Street for a couple of sessions in East London, and then did West London. And then as I moved jobs, I kind of handed it on to someone else, and then set up one where I moved to in Central London, and then
Mm.
palmed that off and moved to a different place. And so technically, there's 3 London Lean Coffees in different locations, and I run none of them personally
Mm.
because other people are now running them. But yeah,
That was
it's
all part of how it was originally designed. Was how can I have a regular meeting in Seattle that I actually don't have to manage?
well. Let's go back to that. So yeah, why did you start it?
Well, so about a decade ago, just over here at a coffee shop near my house, uh, my colleague Jeremy Lightsmith and I sat down, and he said, a lot of people are doing personal Kanban and lean in software and trying to make work more humane. Why don't we start a professional organization? And I was like, that sounds like work. We have to like find a venue and then get speakers and then buy pizza and do all the things, and then in the end it would be just kind of like a different version of everything else that had ever happened
Hmm.
before. So I said, why don't we just kind of do this where we just kind of meet in a coffee shop and talk about how to make work and life better? And he said, oh, like a meetup. And I was like, nah, meetups suck. You get together, you talk, it's kind of like a mixer, and then everyone leaves and nothing really happened other than proximity. So why don't we do this? Why don't we take like a personal Kanban and we'll just throw it down on the table and have everybody write down their stuff? And basically I described it and he's like, oh, that'd be great. And then he kind of extended it and we went back and forth. And about, I think 2 weeks later, we did the first lean coffee here in Seattle at a different coffee shop. And at the very first one, we had 24 or 25 people show up. So, I mean, there was apparently some pent up demand. And then what's been interesting since then was to watch both how it spread around the world in the ones you described, like um, ad hoc ones, but then also how many companies started to adopt it
Mm.
as their primary meeting methodology because it was more humane than agendas or other blunt force objects like that.
Is there a most successful city or nation? I mean, I'm assuming there's more in the States than anywhere else.
So at the beginning, I worked very hard to track them, and then there became too many to track,
Right.
and then I became too busy to try and keep track of any of them. So the quick answer is I have no idea, but what I do know is that people now, this is like the weird thing for me, is that people now find out about personal Kanban because they go to Lean Coffee. And somebody says, well, this was by a guy that did personal Kanban, or that people go to Lean Coffees for a long time and then I will show up at one and then they will try and teach me how to do it.
Brilliant.
so it is outlived me. But as far as like who's doing the most, I have no idea. I know that New York has a few, Seattle has a few, but it might actually be that the two major contenders that I know of would either be Stockholm or London.
And if you make it across, I will make an effort to explain how Lean Coffee works to you.
That would be awesome.
And I'll get someone to video it.
And it would just, I got to tell you, like the next time I get back on a plane, I'll probably be a little bit nervous, but just seeing people again is going to feel so good. It's going to feel so good.
Do you see, obviously this is expanded, Lean Coffee is expanded across the world. So do you see any other future coming out of it? Anything different?
The guys at Ripple Rock in London built Lean Coffee Table. And that has become incredibly popular all of a sudden because no one can go to their Lean Coffees. So I know that the New York one, the one in Belarus, a lot of them have been moving to that. And what's been interesting is that the moment they moved to an online version, then they all started sending me emails saying, hey, would you be part of our Lean Coffee? Our virtual Lean Coffee. So the virtual ones seem to be picking up. The use of it at all, it's been interesting because when you launch an idea, the first thing that people will do is they'll listen to about half of what you say. And then they'll go off and they'll say that they're doing it. So like I went to a construction industry conference and they had a big Lean Coffee. And then they found out in passing that I was the Lean Coffee guy. So like, well, you got to come. And they had, whenever anybody voted, after they voted, they moved all the tickets with any votes at all into doing, like they were talking about them all at the same time. There was no learning column. There was no thing at the end to judge the efficacy of the meeting. So actually, my worry is that what's happening to it is it's getting dumbed down. I swore to myself that today I would not say anything snarky. So I'm going to not say something snarky, but just say like other ideas that have been dumbed down over time.
Right.
This one is suffering the same fate.
I won't ask you to comment on particular tools either. When we had the option of being in person or doing it online, people would still try and do it online, right? I'm assuming that there was an element of this that was about it being in person and people meeting up and actually looking at each other and spending some time with each other rather than being an online thing. So,
absolutely.
But I don't know, that was an assumption.
My preference, whether it's Personal Kanban or Lean Coffee or anything else, is that human beings get together, and whether they're building software or making food or music or anything else, they jam. They get together and they say, okay, we have a goal. That goal may be improvised or it may be very, very distinct, but we are together and we need to build this thing. And so I always go for the tactile. So even though there's now over 100 online Kanban tools, I still use sticky notes here at my desk. We also teach in our classes a lot about something that we call operational imperatives, which is sometimes you don't have a choice about something. So when William Rowden and I had Gray Hill Solutions, our software company, we built software that had very, 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 very low defect rates, like what most people would call impossibly low defect rates. And we did that with a distributed team in the early 2000s. And the way that we did that was we made sure that we collaborated with each other as much as we possibly could. So we believed in pair programming, in swarming, in like, so when Tony Ann and I wrote the Personal Kanban book, She was living in Washington, D.C. I was living in Seattle. Hard for us to get together and have an office or a wall. But every morning she would call on Skype. We would call up a Google Doc and we would pair write. Often writing a book in the same chapter, in the same paragraph at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd be typing, and then like she'd be editing behind me, or she'd start typing something and I'd be editing right behind her. And it worked beautifully. But regardless of whether I would rather be with people. It's hard to hug somebody on a camera. But if you can't, that doesn't mean that you can't have an intimate and personal working environment. It just means you have to be really intentional about how you set that up.
I was flicking back through Personal Kanban last night, and I was thinking, why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we write it? And so I was also going to ask why you decided to write the book.
The reason that I write is when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, I got my first Olivetti typewriter, big, heavy, black typewriter. And on that, I produced the Daily Jim. And I have been a writer ever since. I identify primarily as a writer, even though I have other hats. And writing and reading has just always been if something can truly be a calling, that is a calling of mine. So right now we actually have 4 books that are each about 80% done. And for various reasons, they were shuffled around and not completed. But one of them, which is the one that we're working on now, actually I wrote kind of like you mentioned. It was 3.5 years ago. In September for my birthday in Hawaii, I sat down and wrote the beginning, 4 or 5 chapters of this book. And it's a book on collaborative management. And I got the book completed, was happy with the book. And then I went to work with Turner Construction in New York. And they were such an amazing company that I realized I couldn't finish the book until I'd worked with them for a few years. And it was very humbling because, my ego isn't lacking. It was very humbling to go into a 117-year-old construction company in New York City and find a culture that was so positive, that was like so humane, that I was like, oh crap, I have to help these people and they have to help me back. So that's where my book is right now. So we picked it back up again. I think now is the time, but it was tough letting it sit. It was really tough.
Yeah, does that count as a pen? I'm not sure, because it was technically in your control, right? You could have picked it up. Was it moved back out? Maybe we shouldn't talk about whip limits when we're just admitting that we've got between us 6 books that are not complete.
Yeah, 6 books, a couple of online classes, some marketing. It's like when you own your own company, whip limit is very much a something you have to think very hard about. So when that went on hold, I had to treat it like previous presidents of the United States have treated their companies, where they divorce themselves entirely from the company while they're president. I'd do the same thing with this book. I'd put it in a folder and say, I'm not going to touch this again until it's time. Because if I would have kept noodling on it, then it would have stayed whip. So what it was initially was it was a completed thought exercise that then led to a new option, which was experience Turner for a while. And then the option after that would be complete the book.
Yeah. So there was one discussion I wanted to have about the pen. So, and I don't know if it comes from the ball pen or is it like a pen As in like where you keep sheep. I'm not sure where you were going with it, but
I grew up in the rural parts of the United States, so for me it was where you lock up things of future value until they have matured to the point where you want to pull them back out. So those would be chickens and
okay.
goats and sheep. And
Because I must admit, I don't have a pen column, and I don't have a blocked column. If I've got a chance of putting something in a blocked, there's no incentive, and it's not got a whip limit, or it's not connected to my in progress whip limit, then there's an incentive, or there's no incentive to move it on and push it through and go back to the people and try and get it unblocked, I suppose. So I tend to either put it as a blocked, or as you say, if it's actually not, I'm not able to do anything with it and it's parked long term, shove it back into a not in progress.
Consider it dead. So there are a lot of people, like, let's just say people in specialized customer support. So like we worked with a company that did software for libraries around the planet, and their support group had a lot of things where they had to investigate it or go call people back or things like that. So they were actually more like client managers. So for them, their pen was a different kind of active. So they would have one active ticket and the thing that they were having a conversation about or investigating right this second. But then these other things over here were kind of another part of their value stream. So you couldn't just call somebody back, because you call back and they wouldn't be available, or they wouldn't be ready, or they need someone else to talk on the phone, or they need permission or something. So they would always end up in situations like that. So their pen was fundamentally different than yours or mine might be. I don't use a pen column because I have trained myself to only pull things that I can complete.
Right.
And since I'm sitting at COVID aside, normally I'm never sitting at this desk for more than 5 days at a stretch. So when I come here, I have to have a throughput that is kind of maniacal. So my whip limit is always 1, and it's always something that I can complete. And that's been the thing that we've been training on more often than not now is, find out what the collaborative profile of your work is, who you need to interface with, and if they're not going to be available, don't start. And then that removes 90% of all pen column items right there.
Let's move on rather than getting too geeky. We're going to bore everyone, including myself. But yes.
Oh.
Another thing I saw when I was looking back through is about there's no work life, personal life, right? We don't go down the pit, come home, get washed, have our personal life, right? It doesn't work like that. And I saw a reference when I was going back through it yesterday. I saw the reference in there that people separating the two.
Yep.
Do you still find people when you go into places? Do you still find people doing that, kind of saying that on a personal?
Yeah. As someone who's owned his own business for as long as I can remember now, pretty much. The idea of work-life balance just always seems silly to me because I never did anything that I wasn't passionate about. So if it was writing, if it was coming up with better ways for people to work, if it was music, if it was video, whatever it might be, I never particularly did anything that I hated. And by and large, we've only come across one group of people who actually hated their jobs, like with a passion, hated what they did for a living. But when people say that they want work-life balance, what they mean is probably pretty much the same thing as they say when they say, I need prioritization or help with prioritization. No one needs help with prioritization. And no one needs help with work-life balance. What happens is you have a lot of options, and it has become unclear to you which options to select at what time, because you haven't built a system to make that selection easier. And so whether it's politics, whether it's work overload, whether it's frustrations with spouse or whatever those things might be, there's a pressure out there that is driving people to seek clarity. And that is what we want the personal Kanban or whatever other system we set up to give people. So for me, one of the things that I had to teach myself over time was that it's okay to not sit in this chair when I'm at home. So one of the other things that I started doing was I would give myself regimens when I was traveling. So one was exercise. The other was to make sure that at least, that I've lost about 12 pounds since I came home, simply because there's no one here that says, would you like a scotch? And like literally 12 pounds. And so up in a tab up here, and then on my phone, I always have masterclass. And I always make sure that I'm in the middle of watching some masterclass. So right now it's Neil Gaiman's masterclass. And so just always to make sure that I have some input that isn't what I'm isn't work, so that I still keep my humanity.
About multitasking. Well, no one can effectively multitask.
Where they say I'm an excellent multitasker.
Yeah, or that one, yeah.
There's a saying that isn't used too much anymore in America, which I always really appreciated when I was growing up, which was, sweetie. Which is basically like you just go on thinking that and someday you'll figure it out. So when working with people, almost everyone has been steeped in common knowledge. So it is common knowledge that people can multitask. Otherwise, HR people wouldn't constantly put into work things, must be an expert multitasker. People honestly believe that they work best on their own. People believe that if you give them clear direction, they will give you exactly what you asked for. People believe that their memory of what they did, the amount of time it took them to do it, is accurate. So there's just all these things. People believe that Gantt charts mean something. So there's all these things that we do as a matter of course that haven't worked, but when they don't work, we're able to find some external cause to blame it on. And so our job, I'm sure you find it the same thing, is that when somebody says, I'm an expert multitasker or whatever, you can't argue with them about it, because that's just going to be like, well, you're a liar. And they're like, I am not a liar. And you're like, you are a liar. And they're like, lying is a willful act, and I am not willfully trying to deceive you. And it's like, well, okay, then you're just patently wrong. Oh, okay, now I'm stupid. Well, okay, this is not a helpful conversation. But what is helpful is that when you are able to get a group of people to visualize their work, to reduce their work in progress, even by a little bit, and to build the social structure necessary to create natural continuous improvement. Once people find themselves in that situation, they naturally figure out that overload, multitasking, and all those other things are fool's errands. But you have to be patient, and to be able to show people these things, you can't lecture them to death, because that doesn't work.
So one other thing that I'm bad at is retrospecting on my personal output.
Oh God, yeah.
I've recently been making an effort to do it. I know it's every every Monday I'd clear my done column off my board.
Mm-hmm.
And it used to just be a select all, move to archive, rather than a look through it. Yeah, I don't, and it goes along with the parent of it, which is even when you finish a massive project, like publish a book,
Mm-hmm.
finish a postgrad,
Mm-hmm.
it was just, okay, that's done, now I move on to the next thing. And this is something that's taken like years and years of effort, not just on my behalf, but also on my family's, right? They've had to put up with it. They've had to, I was going to say suffer me going off on my own and not being with them. Some of them might not think that's suffering, but just a bonus. But yeah, it's not celebrating your successes is something that I think we're bad at, whether it's on a week by week basis or a year by year project basis.
Yeah.
And something this is perfectly set up to do, right? We move things to a done column, and we can review them.
Hopefully. So one of the things that we've done, let me grab one of the bigger Personal Kanban notebooks, and hopefully it's not. Sorry, this is one of the Turner notebooks, so it's it's filled with notes. But this is how we're drawing a done column now, as a 2x2 matrix. And then what we will do is, as something moves through the Personal Kanban and it's getting ready for done, when you get to done now, this is now a point where you can actually analyze this. But if you just put it in a done column, you're probably not gonna analyze it. So what we'll do here is we'll like, loved it, liked it, hated it, made me want to kill myself, or project A, project B, project C, project D, or you can do it with impact and effort, or complexity, or what have you. But in real time, see what the results are of things. So like, let's just say that this is the love, like, okay, hated thing. If something shows up here, this is not for your retrospective. This is the hated area. This is for an immediate Kaizen event. So if you really, really hate something, that's when you need to retrospect on it immediately. You can't wait. So the Agile Retrospectives are something that I have recommended in everywhere I go, but they're also totally worthless if you only do that. So if you save up a big batch of potential improvement, at most you'll select one or two of them in the retrospective, and the retrospective will take so long to get to that your memory of what happened will be fuzzy. So if something completely sucks, like this is like a near death sentence for the company, don't wait 2 weeks, 2 months, or for a consultant to arrive to think about it. And the same thing's true at home, So years ago, now almost exactly 10, because that's when you're supposed to replace your hot water tank. Our hot water tank blew up. And so when we put the new hot water tank in, we went and got some technology and we wrote the date that the hot water tank went in, the name of the plumber, and his phone number on the water tank. And now I know, much to my delight and my wife's as well, that in about 6 months we need to replace our water tank now. And right now I wouldn't know, because it doesn't seem like it's been 10 years. Right. So simple systems like that can trigger behavior is what we really want to get out of the Kanban. So whether you want to keep like a done column, which is like done detritus, and then done got to think about it, so the dual done column, that works too. But make sure that you have a system that allows you both on the way out, and we do the same. Done. Where are you? Options. So we do the same on the way in. So the same 2x2 matrix on the way in, and say, okay, how do we want to group these things before they go in? Are we using a priority filter to do that? Are we doing it by some other measure of urgency? Are we trying to balance our workload between a variety of projects? So right now, I have a huge board over here that has all the things that I could be working on during COVID. And I am doing 2 simultaneous WIP limits. One is the project focus and the other is the task focus. So I'm only allowing 2 projects to be in flight at a time and 1 task to be in flight at a time. And I'm just knocking stuff out. So my options column is here. My doing column is here, and my done column is.
What bit of personal Kanban do people misunderstand, ignore, whatever you want to call it, get wrong?
So when you build something that only has 2 rules, you think that you have fully shielded yourself from people ignoring the rules.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that if you build a personal Kanban or any type of Kanban, and you don't engage WIP limits, you're just visualizing your pain. You're not actually doing anything to alleviate it. So if you want the thing to work, you've got to do WIP limits. The other thing is, and like we've talked about just a second ago, is that your work starts before it enters your options column, and it ends long after it hits your doing column or done column. So done isn't done. Done is I've completed my work in a way where I've been able to deliver it to somebody. But there's a step after that, which is, did I learn from what I was doing, and will I do it better next time? So every day, Herbie Hancock practices the piano, and he's Herbie Hancock. Okay. So you still have some practicing to do. You're not perfect. We all have improvements. And if we are real professionals, we are interested in taking whatever our craft is, whether it's software development or anything else, and turning that into the highest quality output we can. That is what I would want people to get from personal Kanban. Better relationships, better understanding of the work and how it's worked, and a better world, both of quality and happy professionals afterwards.
Well, just to clarify on the first point, because I think people still get this wrong, is that if there's not a WIP limit, there's not a pull system. And if there's not a pull system, there's not a Kanban system, right? So if you don't have a WIP limits, you haven't got a Kanban system.
Yeah, then you're just Trello.
Yeah, it's just a visualization, right?
Yeah, you're just a bunch of lists on a screen or a bunch of lists on a piece of paper, and there's a ton of social, psychological, mechanical, operational reasons why that WIP limit is there. It's not a whim. The other thing that the WIP limit will do is it will teach you things like, if this ticket says build space shuttle, that's too big of a ticket. And the goal isn't to make the tickets fit inside an hour or fit inside a day or fit inside 15 minutes. The goal is to make them not ridiculous. So when you complete a ticket, it needs to be in the smallest description possible so that you can look at it, test it, and know that you have successfully completed it. Okay. So something as simple as making a peanut butter sandwich could have 5 or 6 Post-it notes to it, because obtain bread could be a ticket. It's a silly example, but WIP limits themselves are there to train us to better define, better execute, and better learn from the work that we've done. And I'll be very cross with you if you don't do it.
Do you know you're on Blinkist, by the way?
Through making all of these classes, I've figured out, I guess, what my personal message is, because I find that I keep coming back to the same themes regardless of what the classes are. And they are that we tend to want to be in the company of others, and we tend to be very dismissive of ensuring that those relationships are intentional and cared for. And when we do that, we tend to upset people. And then when we upset people, that creates political systems that end up destroying whatever awesome policies, procedures, or systems that we want to build. And so, whether my worry in something like Blinkist is that that message of humanity is going to get lost, and that the message of mechanisms and mechanics is going to be presented, because it's much easier to simplify mechanisms than it is relationships.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, as you say, we remember it, we learn in different ways. For example, the goal. Eli Goldratt's The Goal. You know, many of us remember the story of Herbie and the Scout Pack,
Yep.
right? And we'll remember Theory of Constraints and Drum Buffer Rope because of that story, right? It's a memorable way of doing it, and so yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's why the Y Limit Whip book was taught. It was a half business novel. The same thing. And it was actually really funny because we were sitting at drinks one night, and this is when when Lean Kit was still just Lean Kit, and John Terry just looks at me and says, "You need to go home and write a business novel." And so I did. And I found that to be interestingly rewarding, and it's been well received because of it in kind of the same way. But it's also been interesting the number of people who have come back and said, "I hate business novels." It's like, okay, well, then go read a different book.
Yeah, quite. I've had that too. Just someone said, yeah, I didn't want the narrative. I just wanted to get straight to the point. And it's like, well, then maybe Blinkist is best for you. But I need to get my life. Okay, so I've got a dog in here again who's definitely.
All right, a dog and dinner not far behind.
I've got one last question for you. What's the first thing you're going to do when we get back to normal?
Oh my God. So I love food. And I have run all over this planet meeting lots of people who own beautiful restaurants and are beautiful people. And some of them have gone bankrupt. A lot of them are scrambling. Almost all of them have had to lay people off. 2 of them have already passed away from COVID. And I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I'm going to do something for them. Because they're, as may be apparent by my reaction, they are breaking my heart. Because they're, regardless of where they are on the planet, every single one of them absolutely cares about what they do. And if there's one thing that I love doing in this world, it's going to places. This is what I love about my job, and this is why I don't just work in tech, is I love going to places and meeting with people who geek out about something. About making banjos or creating a designer bottles of rum or cooking great food, or whatever it is. There's a lot of people in this world that really care about how the world is impacted by what they do. And I don't know. I want to find a way to appreciate those people even more than I already have.
Yeah. Well, as a food and winey, keep me informed, and maybe we can do something else. But also, when you are in London, we'll go to a good restaurant and get some good wine.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will.